Welcome back. It's exactly 9:26 a.m. South African time. We cross over to Brighton in the UK, and we're going to be talking with Dr. Philip Proudfoot. He's the research fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, University of Sussex. A very good morning to you. Welcome to the program. And
Good
of
morning.
course,
Thank you for having me.
we're remembering October the 7th. It's absolutely, when I cast my mind to the start of this genocide, I'm still horrified. I can't believe where we're at this point in time. I can't believe the carnage. I never ever imagined that in my lifetime I would see something like this. And here we are. And the whole world, I should imagine, or the majority of the world, is absolutely aghast, despite our outrageous, um, you know, despite just the way we are feeling pretty helpless in the situation. Um, the situation doesn't change for the people of Gaza and now Lebanon. How do you look at the situation and the time and remember how it all started, and now an entire year on, it seems to be going from bad to worse?
Yeah, I mean, after October the 7th, in a relatively short amount of time, Israel had already, in its response, completely tipped the balance in terms of casualties. I think it took around 5, 6 days of constant bombardment until the number of casualties on the Palestinian side was overtaking those from the 7th of October attack. And if we go back to that 7th of October attack and we think about the significance of it and we think about the commemorations of it yesterday, one of the fallouts I think of this past 12 months is the loss of credibility for international law, international humanitarian law, and the humanitarian system itself. So if we take the way in which that attack was talked about, persistently, the number of casualties given is 1,200, right? This is the number of casualties that's given, with no differentiation made between those who were serving IDF soldiers and those who were civilians. Now, if we compare that to the way in which casualties are talked about in Gaza, not only is the differentiation made between Hamas and civilians endlessly, also the statistics and their credibility is persistently questioned. Yet nobody questions the fact when we are presented with the statistics from October the 7th, we're told 1,200 died, 1,200 innocent people. But of course, under international law, Palestinians have the right to armed resistance against the occupying force, which includes Israeli soldiers. And now we see exactly the same thing happening in Lebanon, where an American senator said something like 7 IDF soldiers were murdered by terrorists in Lebanon. Those soldiers are violating Resolution 1701 and invading sovereign territory. So the thing that concerns me most as a practitioner and researcher in humanitarianism is this complete collapse of credibility around the basic norms of international humanitarian law and the basic the huge degree of hypocrisy in the way in which we talk about October 7th and then the genocide that followed in response. And the way in which I view it working is October, as we saw yesterday and as we saw in the immediate aftermath 1 year ago. A huge amount of effort must go into decontextualizing Gaza, making us believe that history began on October the 7th, 2023, not, for instance, as Save the Children said on October 6th, that the previous year was the deadliest year for Palestinian children. They said that on October the 6th. October the 7th, however, in the way in which the situation is presented, is almost the beginning of history. And this is, predominantly where my concerns lie as somebody who does research within the humanitarian system is that with this complete lack of credibility, all aid operations and all humanitarians risk becoming targets because Western powerful global North countries have allowed their primary ally in the region to get away with breaking the fundamentals of international law.
Dr. Philip, I kind of wonder, and I hope and pray that it ends sooner rather than later. Once this genocide has ended, once there's a ceasefire, um, how is the world going to go forward to rebuild not only the physical infrastructure of Gaza, of Palestine, but the, mo- the morale, the
Yeah.
psyche, uh, the psychiatric damage that this has done. And when we talk about the Palestinian people, we know it's going to take decades before they can normalize themselves, their country, and just their lives on the whole. But at the same time, I have no doubt in my mind that God fearing, humane Jewish people who are so against all of this, how are they going to live with themselves and how are they going to talk and defend their Jewishness and the fact that Jewish people or Zionists has perpetrated this horrendous genocide, possibly already now on a scale of a Holocaust on Palestinian people, mainly innocent men, women, and children, because not all of Palestine is Hezbollah, and as the Western world or the detractors of Palestinian people term them as terrorists, they are actually freedom fighters. They're fighting for their rights, the right to their land, and to the fact that they can live ordinary, normal lives like you and I.
So first, the point on reconstruction, I think it's important to underscore that by some estimates, the reconstruction of Gaza will be a significant challenge because there is simply not the level of raw resources in the material, raw resources for the material required to rebuild. So, you need concrete, you need water, you need rock. There's some estimates suggest that there's just simply not enough raw resources to rebuild it. Secondly, the reconstruction, should the Israelis remain in control of the strip in terms of its exit and entry points and the materials that can transfer in, historically they have placed significantly high restrictions on the materials that can go into and out of Gaza. So that would suggest, that any of the sort of building that's been done in Gaza prior to the attacks was often achieved actually through these smuggling tunnels. So we assume that these smuggling tunnels are basically used for weapons. And of course, that's probably true. But at the same time, they're also used for bringing in the basic materials required to build the sort of towers and houses that existed in Gaza. So reconstruction faces a massive, massive challenge. And now we see the exact same level of devastation being wrought upon Beirut and on Lebanon. And the background of Lebanon. So the background of Gaza is a protracted humanitarian crisis. So multi-years of funding appeal, persistent sort of problems with water, food, huge aid dependency, all generated by the siege. Lebanon, by contrast, is a sovereign nation state, and Lebanon's prior to this attack was going through a severe financial crisis prompted by the rapid devaluation of its currency, which reduced its value by 90%, decimated people's savings accounts, and most basic sort of services like power and water was no longer available in Lebanon. They used to have this sort of power shedding system. You don't have power every 3 hours, but now they basically have no power. So that's the background, and then you throw on top of that the bombing. So Lebanon now also faces the same horrendous level of destruction. set against a particularly weak economic outlook. Gaza, the potential for reconstruction is set against, well, if the Israelis maintain their siege, high levels of restriction. And then the question of what comes next. I mean, in my opinion, and I will be called a naive optimist for this and things like this, but in my view, the only body that could really have prevented this at an international level would be a reformed United Nations. So the problem, in my view, is the Security Council and the domination on the Security Council of the United States and sometimes Britain, although we've switched now to abstaining rather than vetoing. But the problem is the Security Council. If we look at the General Assembly and the votes in the General Assembly, and if we look at the ICJ, and if we look at the other institutions and organs and bodies of the United Nations, we actually see that these have been very clear. The General Assembly has called for a ceasefire very quickly. It's systematically condemned the Israeli violence. The General Assembly has been on the right side of history. It is the Security Council. It is the Security Council that is preventing the United Nations from reaching its real potential. So therefore, when we think about, in some future, how can we prevent this happening? In my view, it is for countries, and I'm British, so I'm not hopeful for my government, but it's for countries of the entire global south to demand that the United Nations be reformed so it can live up to its promise. The promise of the Security Council is to maintain peace and stability. What has it actually done? It's maintained 12 months of genocide. And your final point around Jewish people around the world, I think another operation of Zionism is that it cannot allow for the existence of anti-Zionist Jews. And I know in South Africa you have a huge community of anti-Zionist Jews. One of Nelson Mandela's former MPs ran in London. Andrew Feinstein ran in London against Keir Starmer. So one of the functions of the Zionism is to say that those people don't exist. But actually, as we know, within Jewish religious traditions, there's a strong emphasis on humanity, assistance, mutual aid, prohibitions against murder, and across the world, an anti-Zionist Jewish movement does exist, and those people, they've with it, of course, nothing can compare to the Palestinian struggle. But for anti-Zionist Jews, they also have faced identity erasure. They get called horrendous names. They get called, a lot of the sort of Zionist Jews will call them kapel, which means concentration camp guard. And this community also has had its existence erased and its voice suppressed because it doesn't fit into that narrative.
Dr. Philip, I'm going to stretch you for a few minutes longer. I'm really enjoying this discussion. You truly are a deep thinker and you do stretch the imagination regarding these issues. In your view, how much longer do you think that this madness is going to continue? Because surely it has to end at some point. The fact that apartheid Israel has now ventured into Lebanon does kind of indicate that they've got a really big plan as far as the Middle East is concerned and their aspirations regarding their supposed homeland. So they really want to push those borders out as far as they possibly can and create a Zionist super homeland in that part of the world. Your thinking?
So how long it necessarily will last, it's very difficult with the expansion into Lebanon, because we can look for lessons of the past, and we have basically two lessons of the past. We have the Israeli occupation from 1983 to 2000, and we have the attempted war on Lebanon in 2006. Now, the war on Lebanon in 2006, the Israelis were unable to make any progress. They bombed essential infrastructure. The land invasion failed. They were repelled by Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah is distinct from Hamas in terms of its infrastructure, in terms of its military experience. So we should remember that while the attacks that have occurred on its leadership structure, the grossly illegal use of 4,000 improvised explosive devices, the so-called pager attack, which is I would view as one of the cases when we get to the legal front, that is so illegal that is going to be a piece of case law in the future for, when we look back at this time and the sort of illegal actions that were carried out by Israel. However, the news that we are getting from Lebanon now is relatively difficult to follow. Hezbollah does not openly communicate like Hamas, but it seems that the Israelis are having difficulty making progress. And in response to their inability to make progress in the south, they instead bomb Beirut from the sky. Now, that, of course, is not a long-term sustainable military strategy, because you can just bomb from the sky, but the underground networks that Hezbollah have is significantly more developed than Hamas. It will make very little difference. Yes, they'll kill lots and lots of innocent people, but they're not necessarily going to defeat Hezbollah in that way. So why are they doing it? And what does this tell us about what Israel imagines is the end? The reason they're doing it is something that's become known as the Dahya Doctrine, which was established in the 2006 war, which was Israel bombed the southern suburbs of Beirut indiscriminately, carpet bombing, with the intention of trying to cause Lebanese citizens to rise up and demand that Hezbollah dismantles itself. We now can call that the Gaza Doctrine, because it's changed somewhat, and I think it's important to emphasize this change. So in 2006, the standard position of most global North powers was to make a distinction between Hezbollah's militia and its political wing, right? So Hezbollah has elected members of parliament inside the Lebanese parliament. Lebanon is a multi-party democracy that uses a system called confessionalism. So candidates are allotted based on their religion, but you as an individual Lebanese can vote for whoever you want. So people, even if they aren't Shia, might vote for Hezbollah because they agree about Hezbollah's stance toward Israel, for instance, but the candidate has to be Shia. So that's how it works. So they have MPs. So that it's very difficult for global North powers to function inside of Lebanon if they ignore Hezbollah's position in the cabinet and Hezbollah's position within. So the distinction was made. That distinction was collapsed largely in 2019. And what does that mean in terms of the end? That means that what has happened in Gaza, Israel can feel confident to carry out in Lebanon. So that means that a member of parliament in Lebanon, or a municipal worker, or an affiliated health center, or an affiliated supermarket. Hezbollah has their own sort of food distribution system. All of this can be a legitimate target for aerial bombardment, because it's all being prescribed. It's prescribed by global North governments, let me be clear. It is not prescribed by the Security Council, but it is prescribed by America, the European Union, and the United Kingdom, who, as we know, are the single reason why Israel is allowed to do what it does.
Absolutely. Can I please ask your indulgence for a few minutes more of your time? But we do need to go for an ad break. So will you stay
That's
with
fine.
us?
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is Salam Media.
Valley's Motor Spares. We supply
The Africa of your dreams, and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042 203 1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
Dad, these Frymax chips are so tasty. Wow, that really takes me back. My dad bought me a Frymax chips every day after school. They were my favorite when I was your age as well. Quality is at the very heart of what we do, and that's why we ensure that every Frymax packet is filled with the beautiful goodness and flavor-packed taste that you've come to expect from us since 1982. Frymax, from generation to generation.
Yasin, are you? And excellence. Ready to guiding you to financial success.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
It is exactly 9:49 South African time, of course. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes to wrap up time with Dr. Philip Proudfoot, and I do wish I had a couple of hours to sit and talk to you and just unpack all of these amazing and deeply rooted issues around the situation that's playing out right in front of our eyes. And you keep referring to the global north, and we do know that, I guess, once this is all over, please God, sooner rather than later, post the ceasefire, they're going to be held responsible as well. Keir Starmer recently said that Israel has a right to defend itself. At the cost of what? About 50,000. Those are conservative figures. 50,000 people killed. A lot of people are saying it's more like 200,000 people killed in Gaza. Be that as it may, I hope that we can have a future conversation again. What do you believe a ceasefire would look like? The rules and regulations around a ceasefire with Palestine, and that obviously would include Lebanon as well, a ceasefire as far as Lebanon is concerned.
So just very quickly on your first point about Israel having the right to defend itself. Now that depends very much on what country we're talking about here. So Israel does not have a right of defense under international law in relation to Gaza or the occupied West Bank, because they're occupied territories. The right to self-defense only refers to other sovereign nations. So in Gaza and Palestine, what they actually have is a right to police, which contains all sorts of prescriptions around what is a legitimate use of force. So the full deployment of military on an occupied territory is, over and above everything else, illegal, because Gaza is occupied territory. It is not a sovereign state. So therefore, that right doesn't exist. So in terms of what a ceasefire would look like, generally generally the Middle East has always been in a sort of state of permanent ceasefire. Only a few countries have reached a peace agreement with Israel. So Jordan being the neighbor that's the most prominent to have reached a peace agreement. There was movements around, Saudi Arabia establishing its peace agreement. However, mostly the situation is kind of a detente, a stopping of the fighting, and a movement into a kind of Cold War rather than hot war. What Israel potentially wants, but we have to wait and see how this develops. They've now drawn a kind of line above the border from the north into Lebanon, which is their military zone. Now, your listeners probably remember the idea of these zones in Gaza and their consistent expansion. So one could say a ceasefire would look at the securing of the northern border that allows for the return of Israeli residents. But that's very unlikely to happen. Hezbollah will be able to maintain a permanent state of insecurity in the north. So there has to be some sort of agreement. And I want to finish by saying a ceasefire is not enough. It feels silly now to even talk about a ceasefire, because a ceasefire should have been the bare minimum 9 months ago. What there needs to be is ceasefire, sanctions against Israel, arrest warrants issued from the International Criminal Court against all those in the chain of command who are responsible, fundamental rights restored to the Palestinians, as well as significant financial reparations for the damage that Israel has caused, and that Israel should bear the cost of reconstruction in both Lebanon and in Gaza. This should not fall on anyone other than Israel and for their actions. Now, ceasefire is the bare minimum, but we cannot just end there, because a ceasefire is meaningless. As they say, no justice, there's no peace.
Absolutely. Just very quickly, I'd like to add, I've been raising this question about reparation. I believe that the global north are responsible as well, partially responsible. UK, US, they've been supplying the weaponry, Germany, France, etc. They too should be responsible for reparation as far as the people of Gaza, Palestine, and Lebanon. But I've got to leave it there. Can't wait to talk with you again sometime soon. Thank you indeed for your deep insights on this matter. Thank you. Go well. God bless.
No problem. Thank you very much. I enjoyed speaking to you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That was Research Fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, University of Sussex, Dr. Philip Proudfoot, talking to us about what else, the genocide and the aftermath. We hope and pray it's soon rather than later. It is exactly 9:54. News and Views moving along. We are now going to be joined by Adila Sirkot. She is Islamic Relief South Africa's fundraising coordinator, and we do have some very important points to raise with her this morning. So please do stay with us.
With her spectacular beauty.